Hey Bulldogs, Chris Bryant here, and in today's CCNA and CCNP TSHOOT discussion, and that's what we're going to have here. It's more of a discussion than the usual video boot camp or video practice exam, because I want to talk to you newcomers as well. There's something here for everybody when we talk about troubleshooting models and reality versus theory. Because in the emails I get every day, and of course messages, via Twitter and Facebook, I hear from newcomers all the time, and that's great because one thing I always said when I started this business, I didn't want to forget what it was like to just get started. I know it can be difficult, I know it can be intimidating, and I want to help you get over some of that intimidation today. And you CCNPers, got a little something here for you too, so stick around. Because when it comes to troubleshooting, you'll have people, you'll walk into somebody every once in a while and say, well, you can't learn to troubleshoot from a book. And can you learn 100% troubleshooting from a book? No. I mean, a little hands-on with the equipment, whatever that happens to be, always helps. Because what I'll get are messages, well, a lot like the situation I ran into when I broke into IT. Because when I got my first support job, I was just absolutely thrilled. But the only issue was that I was actually supporting something that I had never worked with in my life. They were Macs. And that's certainly nothing against Macs, it's just that I had never worked with one before, and all of a sudden I was responsible for, supporting 250 of them. So all of a sudden I'm in that situation, and of course, at the time I was like, well, boy, I've never touched this, how is this kind of thing going to go? Well, I want to tell you that every single one of us goes through that, and frankly, you might still go through it even though you've been in the field for 10 years. Because while it's great to be well-rounded, most of us are kind of specialists in this business, and there are very few of us who have a tremendous amount of world-class experience with every piece of hardware and software that exists in networking today. And then of course you throw in the host devices, and there's almost no way you can be experienced in everything. There's always going to be that time when you have to troubleshoot something that you've never touched before, or that you've only been, say, maybe an end user, you've never had to troubleshoot it before. So what you really need in that particular situation is a plan. Because I'm going to tell you something, and don't tell anybody I told you this, experience is not the end-all and the be-all and the holy grail of network troubleshooting. There, I said it. It's fantastic to have. I don't want anybody out there saying, hey, Chris Bryant, down talk experience. I don't. But I'm also saying that it's not the only thing you have to have. Just because you've been networking for a long time, it does not automatically make you a fantastic troubleshooter, because again, sooner or later we got to work with something we've never worked with before. Now, the theoretical troubleshooting models, and this is more for you CCNP troubleshoot candidates, because this is not going to show up on your NA. You got enough models to work with now. The theoretical troubleshooting models that you know for your NP troubleshooting exam, they're great to know for the exam, and I am definitely not down talking any of those models. But the practicality of some of those models in the real world can be kind of limited, especially if you've had a job like, again, my first IT job where I was really by myself. If you're by yourself, divide and conquer might not work out. The model for having multiple people to carry out the task, that is. But one thing you've got to have is a plan to go along with that. And most of us do not get a lot of time to think about what their troubleshooting approach is going to be. Because if we get called to fix something, whether it be a printer, router, switch, PC, I don't care. When we get that trouble ticket or we get that call, we generally don't have time to say, well, now I shall retreat to my fortress of solitude and decide which of the troubleshooting models I'm going to use. We don't really have time for that, right? I mean, you got to go to the room, or you got to go to the office, you got to go to the building, you got to fix the thing. So you don't have a whole lot of time to compare troubleshooting models. But the one thing that you've got to have before you go in there is a plan. You've got to have an approach, as I usually call it, and it almost doesn't matter what your plan is. And for those of you working on the CCNP TSHOOT exam, I'm not saying that any of the models you learn in there are wrong. I'm just saying that you've got to have a plan when you get that call. And I want to share with you what my default setting, if you will, for a troubleshooting approach has been for a long time, and that's the OSI model starting at the bottom. And some of you, especially you CCNA, some of you thinking, oh man, I'm going to actually use this. because I want to bring that up because, you've got these models you got to memorize. You got the TCP/IP model, you got the OSI model, you got to learn what goes on at every layer. And I went through this just like you're going through it, and you can't help but to think, is this really important? I mean, do I really need to know this? Because when I turn a PC on, it just turns on. I don't see anything about a data link layer and a routing layer and all that stuff. Well, this isn't just for memorizing for an exam. This model is really helpful, and it's really helpful in troubleshooting. Officially, I believe called the bottom-up method, because some people will start at layer 7 and go down. I like to start at layer 1, the physical layer, and go up. Because please trust me, and some of you, especially you help desk veterans out there, you're already nodding your head and laughing. You might think that sounds like a really silly approach if you haven't tried it, because you think, well, of course the thing's on. They wouldn't call me if it weren't on. Believe me. Believe me when I tell you that if you ever work a phone support, you're going to get calls from people where the device is off and they don't realize it. Classic example very quickly is a PC. My PC won't start. Well, is it plugged in? Yes. I'm looking at the cable and it is plugged into the PC, and I'm looking at the plug and it is plugged into an outlet that I know is working. Well, the problem is the adapter in the middle, could be slightly unplugged. And of course, slightly unplugged is just as good as totally unplugged, because they're not going to get to turn it on. I really like starting at the physical layer, because it's not always just a matter of the power being off, but it's also a matter of, say, especially cables being loosened slightly. That can happen in a very packed closet where you've got routers and switches, and people go in there once in a while and the elbows start hitting cables, and sooner or later a serial cable comes just loose enough. So I really like starting with the physical layer. As you learn about these models, of course, you're going to develop your own style, because you can read my books and you can get out there and you can read, Cisco Press's books, watch videos, whatever you're doing. But as you do gain that experience over time, you'll develop your own troubleshooting approach. But again, I think a fantastic one for you to start with, especially if you're relatively new to networking, starting with that OSI model. You're talking to that person on the phone. Make sure the device in question is getting power. And I could write a book on that, because sometimes you've got tech-savvy people on the other side of that phone, other end of that line, and sometimes you don't. So that part can be a challenge, but we'll talk about that in another video. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube feed, and I'm Chris Bryant, CCIE 12933.